Okay, ruin might be a bit harsh, but we talk a lot about how DMs can mess up and ruin their games, and it can be tough being the guy where the buck stops and the blame lands. Sometimes it is a player that throws a wrench in the game, and so the question we have to ask is it you? How? And what can you do about it? Whether it's you or someone else ruining the fun at your table. But first, a public service announcement. None of these things ruin a game if they happen occasionally, so let's be kind to one another. In fact, even if these things are happening at your game on a regular basis, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are ruining things for you or for others. If you're aware of others and you try to focus on being considerate to the other players and the DM at the table, then we all win and it'll be impossible for anyone to ruin our games. Of the 5 issues that I've got in mind for us to talk today, the first is a pretty ubiquitous one, and it's ingrained in us from elsewhere in our lives, and that is our inability to pay attention for any length of time. This can be a real frustration for a DM who's put blood, sweat, and tears into preparing something only to have it gloss past certain players that aren't listening at the time that it happens. And it's a pretty endemic and obvious problem. You might be guilty of this if when your turn finally rolls around in combat, you need a recap of what's happening around you in order to be able to make your decisions. You also might be guilty if you find yourself on your phone for regular periods, whether in or out of combat, though in combat lack of attention actually sucks more away from the game than pretty much anywhere else. If you're constantly needing to be reminded of the happenings in the game because you weren't able to pay attention the first time that they happened, then this might be a problem that you're suffering from. If you're struggling with this particular issue and have recognized it in yourself, congratulations, you're already halfway there to fixing the problem. Finding ways to remove from yourself those things that you find yourself distracted by is a great way to move towards a more focused attention at the game. Finding ways to entertain yourself as part of the game and can really go a long way. For me, when I was struggling to pay attention in a specific game, one of the things that I would do is try to write down real quick some questions that I had about the world or the people around me, and then focus on getting answers to those questions. By giving yourself something to focus on, you not only focus upon the thing that you're after, but it also helps you to focus on the rest of what's going on. Trying to decide for yourself what you're going to do next is a great way to focus your attention. If you simply focus on what will my character do next, what would my character do next throughout the course of combat and non-combat scenes, then as you're trying to fit yourself into the action, you're going to find your attention is less likely to wander. When it comes to helping others who suffer from this problem, there's not a lot that we can do to force people to pay attention, and it's not necessarily going to be healthy for your game to do so. We can help other people in these situations by recognizing that it might be important for us to provide a little more context to questions that we direct to them when we try to pull them back into the action. Pulling them into the action by saying, "What do you do?" when their turn rolls around is not necessarily as useful as saying, "This has just happened, this is what's going to happen, and this enemy is about to act, what do you do?" So that you pull people into the scenario by giving them that brief little recap. You don't need to make it long and involved, but the amount of time you spend on bringing them in is going to be less than the time it takes to explain everything that has happened when they ask their questions piecemeal in order to figure out how they can step back in. The next common player problem is about making decisions. It's called analysis paralysis at my tables, and it's essentially where your players are struggling to make a decision out of the options that you've presented. Either they feel like they've got too many options and they're struggling to figure out which is the right one, or even if there's just one or two options, they don't want to risk picking one over the other for fear that they're stepping on somebody else's toes at the table or that they are going to be making the wrong choice. You might be guilty of analysis paralysis if you are always the one stepping out of votes and unwilling to pick, or if you are constantly questioning the decision that's about to be made and putting it back into the discussion process. It doesn't take much to push a group into a spiral of analysis paralysis, but certain groups are more likely to do so than others. If you're struggling with making decisions and you find yourself constantly worried that you're making the right one thing that you can do to help yourself is to recognize that there are very few truly wrong choices in Dungeons and Dragons. Your DM is going to roll with whatever you decide to do, and there's going to be adventure in every direction in your world. And as long as you can let go a little bit and try to make the decision that is going to move you forward in one direction or another, things are usually going to end out pretty well. Another way that you can focus on fixing yourself in this is to create for yourself a prompt that helps you to get into the head of your character. Something that I've used before as a prompt is, if I were such and such in this situation, what would I do? WW character name D is perfectly viable as a prompt to run through your head so that you can make the decision that your character would make rather than trying to get stuck out in the meta sort of question of which is the right decision, which decision will move the story, which decision does my DM want me to make, and those kinds of paralytic thoughts. When we're trying to help others to improve on making decisions, some things that we can do as DMs or as players is to summarize the decisions and give a simple list of options, call for votes, and use the democratic process so that whichever gets the highest vote is the way that you guys go, and you reliably do this. Or to simplify and lessen the number of decision points by crossing out any that don't seem viable so that it's not such a heavy decision on these kinds of players. The third problem that players often come to the table with is the main character syndrome, or spotlight hogging. Essentially, this is what it sounds like, where somebody is trying to get attention and keeping it on themselves by monopolizing the time of the dungeon master, or by going off in their own directions, by refusing to work as a team and by working under their own decisions only, so that they end up forcing people to follow along behind them in order to keep the game going as team players get caught struggling along behind this player that is forcing their hand. You might be guilty of being a spotlight hog if you say things like, "This is what my character would do," when opposed by your entire team on a regular basis. It's okay that your character might not act in the same manner that everybody else does, but D&D is at its heart a team sport, and if you're not playing as a member of the team, but as an individual in the team, then you are not necessarily helping your group in the way that will provide the best gameplay at your table. If you've recognized that you have a propensity for hogging the spotlight to yourself and taking up all the time, or forcing your other player mates into going down the path that you wanted rather than exploring the group's consensus, then the first thing that you can do is to start thinking about how you can play as a more team player. The best way that I've found for moving a spotlight hog situation forward is to instead try and figure out a way to change your focus into pushing the spotlight onto someone else. If you're the director of the action, then you can still feel like you've got that sense of control over what's happening, but instead of trying to pull that attention onto yourself, be in charge of putting that attention on the other players at your table. Highlight the plans of others and jump on and play the bandwagon game. Even if it's just the first decision that gets offered up there, that's the one that you jump onto, and you use the strength that you have for pulling the group along with you for good by instead pulling the group along with you with somebody else's idea, so that you're working in with the group and moving forward as a unit instead of dragging them along behind you kicking and screaming. When it comes to helping others who have this spotlight problem, or any of these problems, honestly, one of the first things that you can do is have frank and open communication. Let them know that they're dragging things away from what the group is necessarily looking for, and that you would like them to try and work with you instead of working on their own while you're dragging along in the background. Unfortunately, this is a tough one for you to help them to change when it's really an internal sort of drive that's going on. At the DM level, you can make a fairly large impact on Spotlight Hog players, however, by minimizing the spotlight on the directions that are away from the group and focusing on your time. If, for instance, somebody is splitting off and trying to go over in this direction, and the majority of the group, fed up with the Spotlight Hog, are going in another, rather than trying to punish this player by putting them into tough situations that they're probably then going to enjoy finding a way to get out of, or the other players are going to feel the need to come and rescue them. Instead, make sure that you divide your time evenly. If you've got a 5-man group, then if you go and spend 5 minutes on the Spotlight Hog, then the other 4 players should get 20 minutes of your time spent over on them. Spotlight Hogs don't like to be left out of the action, and so they're going to want to stick around where the time is going to be spent. If you as the DM are focused on spending time where the majority of the group are, then that's going to be where your hog players gravitate towards. Don't do this with a spirit of punishing, because these players are just as important as every other at your table, and the desire to go off and be followed is a natural one that many people feel. But if you keep the attention on the group where the game is intended to keep it, then you're going to eventually find that they at least stick around where they're supposed to and can use that power of trying to drive people forward and lead for the benefit of the party in general. The 4th player issue isn't always a problem, but in some groups it becomes so, especially when you have lots of players that experience it, and that's the problem of passivity. Passivity is when players are sort of passively leaning back and following along, going with the crowd, and not really willing to step up and drive action or make decisions on their own. They might seem uninterested, and sometimes it can be really questionable why they're there at the table. But in all honesty, some players are there to play with you, mostly because they enjoy either passing the role and lead off to other people, which we call submission or abnegation, or if they're there because they enjoy your company and they want to hang out with their friends, and the fact that you're playing D&D is maybe less important to them than it is to other people, and they're just there for the fellowship. And both of those are viable and okay at the table. It gets to be really more of a problem when you have a lot of passive players at your table. It can be exhausting as a DM to try and pull a bunch of players along the path that is prepared, whether or not you're railroading or not railroading. If nobody will make a decision, you feel like you have to constantly pull them to go moving, then you've got a bunch of passive players at your table. You might be guilty of passivity if you don't care which path the group goes on a regular basis, to the point where you don't make decisions or ever answer a question of which path you guys should be taking. If your DM has to constantly suggest the next course of action, and you're receiving questions along those lines of, so are you guys going to go here or here or here, and then the question is repeated again a few minutes later because nobody made a decision, then you might be suffering from a group of passive players, or you might be one of those players. If you've recognized that you yourself are just there for the fellowship and don't really mind which direction things go, it's important that you communicate that to people, and that alone can sometimes fix this problem if it's a problem at your table, by letting whoever is invested and who does have a great deal of drive to go forward know that they're not stepping on your toes if they pick a direction and just let you come along for the fellowship, by letting your DM know that you're okay with having him take a stronger hand towards your agency and drive and help you towards decision making. You can allow them to have the freedom to move things forward and to take some of that pressure off of you that you might be feeling. When it comes to helping others who are passive players, likewise, you can recognize in some people that they don't mind if you make decisions, and so you can be a little bit more forceful, and that's one way to take the pressure off of that passive player. Or you can try harder to summarize down to lesser choices, a shorter decision paths, small decisions that are just a one or two options, and take people at their word when they say they don't mind which of the options are chosen. Typically, I would say that the former is the better path for helping the passive player. Just having somebody at the table that takes charge and makes a decision and pushes the narrative forward will help, no matter how many passive players you have in that group, to overcome that passivity and move forward along the path. And communicating amongst one another is, as always, super key. The final ruining thing that players sometimes do is playing adversarially. It's kind of tied into the main character syndrome, but not always do these two overlap. Adversarial play is where you are playing against the other players at the table instead of alongside them. It's very much an anti-teamwork rather than a follow me, I'm in charge and I'm the main character. This is more of a I'm doing this because I don't want you to succeed on something, or I don't want you to have something. It's characterized by a lot of selfish rogues and assassins that have jumped into various games, or other edgelords that are keeping secrets from the group or trying to stop people from finding loot because they want to put it in their own pockets. Adversarial play is easy to spot because it's people that are doing things that harm other players at the table. If it breaks down into rules being used between multiple characters, it's a good idea to watch those moments and see whether this is friendly camaraderie or whether or not one person is trying to get over on another person. You might be guilty of adversarial play if you've ever snuck ahead and kept information to yourself or kept loot in your own pockets, and you've used the excuse of it's what my character might do, but everybody around the table has been frustrated by what your character might do. In the end of the day, though, we like to make characters and we tell ourselves that our characters have this certain personality, you are in charge of what personality your character has, and so you can decide on how to create a character that has the personality you desire but is still a team player with your particular group. Coming up with a reason for that is the most important skill that gets lost in Dungeons & Dragons. You are a team player if you're playing Dungeons & Dragons. If you're not a team player, then you might be playing a different game than everybody else at your table. If you've recognized this in yourself and you're looking to stop, then start thinking about how you could look at your decision making differently. Start thinking about how you could create your characters, or how your character could choose to act in a way that is not going to be adversarial to the other players at your table. You can almost always find a justification if you just tell yourself, this is truth about my character and this is truth about how I need to act in order for my play to fit into the play style of the group here, and then letting your brain draw the connection between those 2 points. If you start only with this one point, you might go in any direction and some of them might be poor choices. But if you always keep in mind the play of your group and that you need to be playing in a team-friendly fashion, then no matter where you start in your character's personality, traits, and proclivities, you'll always come to the right decision that leads you towards play with the group. When it comes to helping others, the DM certainly has the opportunity to shut down some things by having frank conversations or having rules in place about what has to be shared between players. It's pretty simple to put rules that stop some of the anti-teamwork things in place. For me, I use a PvP rule at my tables where you're allowed to roll dice and cast spells and do whatever you want amongst one another, but if both parties aren't willing participants in that, then whoever is not willing has the option to just shut it down. As long as they don't then attempt to do something back, then this works out fine, and if somebody starts pushing back while using this as a defense, then I take away the shield and frankly tell them that that's what's happening. By giving players on the defensive side a opportunity to opt out of some of the adversarial play that's coming their way, it helps to control the adversarial play from the adversarial player. Remember, friends, no matter if it's you or someone else who's causing trouble at your game, keep it friendly. D&D is a friendly game no matter how serious we try to take it sometimes. Hopefully this video has been useful to you, so please take a moment and share it with somebody that might need it. I'm on a quest to reach 10k subs by the end of the year, and if I do, you're the one who gets the perks. I'll be releasing a one-shot video, a series of parodies with my granddaughter Jay LaBelle, and having a community hangout party. Thanks for helping us to get this far. Since we didn't get to see much of Lila during this video except a little bit of her sleeping in the corner, here's a little bit of her being cute on video. Thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.
Here we go. Mama. You good girl.
Mama, is this how you play chess?